Coming up on Bridge City News. Today marks the second anniversary of the tragic Humboldt Broncos bus crash. We have a comment from Premier Kenney marking the event. The province has come up with new numbers as to how many new cases of COVID-19 there are, including those here in the South Zone. And today is National Tartan Day, as we hear from some of those in our Scottish community about what this day means to them.
Your nation, your province, your southern Alberta. From the heart of Lethbridge, it's Bridge City News with Hal Robbins.
Thanks so much for joining us. Today is the second anniversary of the Humboldt Broncos bus tragedy. 2 years ago on a rural highway in Saskatchewan, 16 people were killed and 13 others were injured when a truck collided with a bus carrying the Humboldt Broncos junior hockey team. In a release earlier today, Premier Jason Kenney had this to say. As we mark this sad anniversary, we thank the Humboldt Broncos community for the grace they showed in the depths of grief and the messages of hope and love that they continue to share. In a tweet earlier today, the Humboldt Broncos team wrote this: April 6, 2018 is a day the Humboldt Broncos organization, along with the hockey world, will never forget. Today and every day we remember and pay tribute to all 29, always in our thoughts and prayers. Last March, the semi-truck driver Jaskrit Singh Sidhu, who was involved in the Humboldt Broncos bus crash, was sentenced to 8 years in prison. A woman in her 80s in the Calgary zone died today from the novel coronavirus. This is the 11th death which has occurred at the Mackenzie Town long-term care facility. That brings the total number of deaths in our province from COVID-19 to 24. There are also 98 new cases reported, with a total of 1,348 who've tested positive for the coronavirus. Fortunately, 361 people have recovered from the virus, and just over 200 people got the virus through community transmission.
We must do everything we can to prevent the spread of this virus from person to person in the community. I know this is becoming increasingly difficult the longer this goes on, and especially with a long weekend coming up when normally people would be gathering together. But please continue to stay home. The less you are out in the community, the less chance you have of contracting or spreading the illness.
Dr. Henshaw says the social distancing behavior, washing our hands regularly, and staying home recommendations are all paying off to help keep Albertans safe. Lethbridge City Council voted in favor to increase our city's line of credit today from $10 million to $60 million to help provide a safety net during the COVID-19 pandemic. Also at Council, members voted down a motion against funding for the Niki-Yuko Community Facility. Council members say the project is shovel-ready and will provide local economic benefits coming out of the COVID-19 crisis this year. The Economic Recovery Task Force was recently unveiled. Its main goal is to partner with local Lethbridge and Southern Alberta businesses to help them during these tough economic times. Trevor Lewington from Economic Development Lethbridge provided an update today during City Council and talked about more layoffs looming in the future and what that will mean for our economy.
At this point, honestly, it's so widespread. I think, most business in general is being impacted by this situation. Clearly sectors that are tourism dependent, airlines, things like that, are outside of the city's real responsibility. We need to see federal and provincial governments step up. But the city knows its business is best, and I think that's really where organizations like the Chamber can play a role in terms of providing that targeting and helping them identify who's really struggling and what are those issues.
Lewington says that 30 days without cash flow will mean 1 in 4 businesses will fail. Businesses in Lethbridge are still awaiting word on potentially deferring taxes during the COVID-19 pandemic. The president of the Lethbridge Chamber of Commerce, Cindy Voss, says the businesses are hoping for a date on when they can expect this help.
With some of the provincial and federal announcements, we have a date for this, we have a date for this. I think what businesses in Lethbridge need is a date. They need that hope. When are we going to look at this? What does it look like? I don't want to plan my business around it, but it would be good to know that, say, I would be able to defer my tax payment or only pay half of it. Or, what is the plan I can put in place?
Voss says that without knowing a date, businesses will not be able to put a plan in place. In the midst of the coronavirus pandemic, small business owners are now approaching their businesses a little bit differently. For one business owner in Lethbridge, he is thinking not outside, but inside of the box.
We are actually allowing people to come window shopping, where they can come and we'll bring the books up to the window on a table so that they can kind of browse that way, as opposed to what we were doing before, which is people browse themselves. We're also allowing people to order online, either Facebook, Instagram, email and phone us to come pick up books. We put a chair with a box outside. We put the books in the box, and we allow people to put the money into the box and take the books. So there is no contact whatsoever.
Imagine if professionals and companies alike offered up unique gifts and services to help community groups impacted by COVID-19. That's what another business owner in our city is doing in hopes of sparking more businesses paying it forward.
Seeing family members and friends and people I know that own businesses, and they were going through some tough times, and not only people that own businesses, but families that had kids, and I know they were hurting. So for us, we're an essential business. We're in agriculture. It's work as usual for us, and it's not a lot, but it's something that we're doing. And if we can inspire other companies to do 50 families, then maybe it makes a big impact.
The Salvation Army in particular has been affected across the country, if not across the world. We've had to shut down our thrift store, we've had to shut down our church and our regular worship services and anybody accessing our facilities. So it's had a tremendous impact on us financially in particular. But Josh and Advanced Ag and other businesses and other agencies in the community that will step up will undoubtedly really help us in a lot of material goods that we're needing and going through very quickly.
It's just amazing to see that people want to give back in a concerted, organized effort, and to challenge other businesses to do the same. It just makes my heart very, very happy.
A new connected cycling system is one step closer to becoming a reality in Lethbridge. City Council voted today to send the proposal to the next capital improvement program for consideration. Councillor Jeff Kaufman, who moved the motion, believes this is an important step in creating better accessibility and livability for the community. The study looked at several multi-use pathways along major roads and highways to allow better access for those who cycle. The next CIP process is slated for 2022, and deliberations will begin in June of 2021. Another note from City Council is that Lethbridge residents will not be charged late payment fees on their utility accounts while the COVID-19 pandemic continues. Deputy Mayor Belinda Crowson says the development of the bylaw is one way Council can assist those struggling financially during this time. The waiver of late payment penalties and fees ends on June the 19th. Lethbridge Police have a reminder that family members and others who live under the same roof are exempt from the 2-meter social distancing rule. During the COVID-19 pandemic, a public health order was brought forth that does not allow a gathering of more than 15 people in an outdoor location. Effective today, the order has been amended, and people from inside the same house are exempt from the requirement to maintain 2 meters of distance. If you're feeling a little cooped up and restless in your home, the City of Lethbridge may have the solution. Trails and pathways remain open. The city has an app that you can download which maps out all of the trails which are still available to walk in the city.
And it has up-to-date information on all of our pathways, so what's available, and all of our parks, so where they're at and what's there. So it's a whole bunch of information that's mobile and people can take with them. When you're using the app for the pathways, it shows you where you're at and the relation of the maps out or the pathways out in front of you. If the park's too busy, and that may be the case, especially on nice days, is go to another place. We've got 250 kilometers of pathways, so they're not all crowded all the time.
All parks in the city with a surface are closed, specifically playgrounds and parks with washrooms, picnic tables, and benches. Federal Conservative leader Andrew Scheer is calling on the government to increase the charitable donation tax credit. He says this would help increase charitable contributions to hospitals, churches, food banks, and women's shelters.
I know that local charities, community groups, and religious organizations are vital to helping Canadians get through tough times like these. But while the need for their services only continues to increase, the donations that these groups rely on have dramatically declined. Churches haven't been able to hold weekly services, in-person fundraisers and events have been canceled, and many Canadians who normally contribute are no longer in a position to do so.
Now, one of the provinces which has been hit quite hard by the coronavirus pandemic is Ontario. That province is now reporting 309 new COVID-19 cases, including 13 additional deaths. The new cases represent a 7.7% increase over the past 24 hours. There are now over 4,300 cases of the virus in Ontario. Around 600 people are hospitalized with COVID-19 in the province, with more than 200 in intensive care. The number of resolved cases jumped by more than 37% over the past day. Ontario Premier Doug Ford says recent restrictions on shipments at U.S. border have left his province with just one more week's worth of personal protective equipment for healthcare workers. Ford says a recent shipment of masks was held up over the weekend, but since then, 500,000 have been released. Ford says without eased American restrictions, the province's supply will continue to be strained.
I've been on the phone, talked to Ambassador Lighthizer. He actually called me on Sunday, had a really positive conversation with the ambassador. I've been on the phone all weekend with, and this morning with Deputy Prime Minister Freeland, and she's working around the clock to try to resolve the issue we're facing with the U.S. government. And so what I understand is we had 3 million masks that were stopped by U.S. officials coming out of 3M in South Dakota. I just was briefed not long ago saying that we were able to get 500,000 N95 masks moving forward. That should be released today and coming into Ontario.
Ottawa has been talking to American officials after reports that a shipment of the millions of N95 masks bound for Ontario was held up at the U.S.-Canada border.
We are working very closely with all provinces and monitoring the levels of personal protective equipment and the challenges they're facing both on procurement and on making sure that our health officials, healthcare workers across the country get the kind of help that they need. We continue to have productive and positive conversations with the United States, emphasizing for them that healthcare supplies and workers across the border are very much a two-way street, and we need to continue to enable us to be there for our neighbors because it's in our collective interest.
Our country's Chief Public Officer of Health, Dr. Theresa Tam, says the evidence of wearing masks to stop the spread of COVID-19 is still weak. With that being said, Tam says Ottawa is still leaning towards having Canadians wear non-medical masks in public to keep wearers from spreading the novel coronavirus.
On the issue or the area of wearing masks to protect others, which is the what we're talking about is non-medical masks, which may be made of cloth, for example, for people making it at home, as an added layer of protection is a bit like covering your cough. I think the Special Advisory Committee looked at the literature around the use of masks for this sort of source control, and it's actually mainly from influenza studies, and they are not very clear. So we want everybody to be aware that the science is not certain, but we believe in a, we need to do everything that we can. It seems a sensible thing to do. So I think we recommend that Canadians can take this additional measure.
Some Canadians are being left out of the federal emergency aid benefit that rolls out this week. That is according to Conservative finance critic Pierre Poilievre, who says the program has serious design flaws which need to be addressed. Canadians who lost their income due to COVID-19 and are born in the first 3 months of the year can submit their applications today. Those born in the other months can apply later this week. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau is asking for Canadians with special skills to volunteer their help as part of the response to the COVID-19 pandemic. He also announced that reservists in the Canadian military will be offered full-time positions as part of the response to the crisis.
For those of you with specialized skills looking to help our frontline workers, we do want to hear from you. Health Canada is building an inventory of specialized volunteers that provinces and territories can draw on to provide more support to our healthcare workers. This could include tracking cases and tracing contact, as well as collecting and reporting data. If you can help, please sign up online at canada.ca/coronavirus. Applications will be open until April 24th. We're also offering full-time jobs to all reservists in the Canadian Forces. We're contacting reservists across the country to see if they're interested and offering them the same pay and benefits as regular force personnel.
Here is a unique way of repurposing masks during the coronavirus pandemic. Michigan State University is using a commercial oven to re-sterilize N95 masks.
You heat the masks to about 158 degrees for 30 minutes. And then they're sterilized. And these masks then come out the other side, individually wrapped, and you can then take them back to the hospital and they can be reused. And the early data on it says you can do it 20 times, perhaps more, but we're going to start with that. But each time we're going to test it to make sure that in no way have we compromised the integrity of these masks. Some are already at this point where, they're reusing the masks in ways that, aren't ultimately going to be safe. So the key is there's not enough, and this is a way to reliably make sure that the supply is maintained.
Hospital workers in New Orleans are being encouraged as they go to work each day with colorful chalk messages thanking them for all that they're doing.
So this is a pathway that most residents take in and out of work from the parking lot and also other employees. So as you're walking in, it says, if you're just arriving, thank you for what you're about to do. And then as you walk a little bit further, it says, you are extraordinary.
It's nice. It's really nice. Give us hope.
And then as you leave and you're walking out to go home, it says, if you are leaving, thank you, rest well. So it was very sweet of whoever did that. It definitely meant a lot to me, and it was a surprise, a colorful surprise, walking out and going home to go to bed after a long shift.
Many experts agree that the relationship with China has to improve for both Canada and the United States, especially when it comes to trade. Fergus Hodgson, who is the director with Econ Americas, says when you're dealing with China, you have to remember that you're negotiating with a communist government.
We're dealing with a totalitarian or dictatorial communist regime that is totally antithetical to Canadian values of liberal values of free speech, civil liberties. And so this requires a long-term reworking or reframing of all engagement with China, that you're not dealing with a friendly nation, you're dealing with a hostile enemy, basically. And they are using Canadian rule of law or Canadian good values to our own detriment, to be frank.
Catch the full interview with Fergus Hodgson with NBCN's Paul Arthur discussing our trade relationship with China. That is coming up after business news. Hikers on a famous trail are facing some difficult decisions as the coronavirus pandemic worsens in the United States. Do they postpone a dream or ignore warnings and keep on hiking?
An unexpected detour from what was supposed to be a newlywed adventure. Just days after their wedding, Alexandra Eagle and Jonathan Hall set out to hike the Appalachian Trail's 2,190 miles.
Walking off the trail feels like a step in the wrong direction.
We're on our way to Georgia.
They quit their jobs, moved out of their Brooklyn apartment, and started the trek last month, just as the new coronavirus pandemic was spreading around the world.
I knew it would spread.
Yeah, I wasn't surprised
I never dreamed it would affect the trail.
The Appalachian Trail Conservancy issued a plea asking all hikers to leave the trail immediately. It's concerned hikers will infect each other and the small towns they visit.
My personal wish would be that I would be allowed to keep hiking this trail as long as I practice extreme social distance.
Kimberly Selvage feels safer alone on the trail than heading back to Las Vegas, where she rented out her house, but ultimately decided to postpone her dream after hiking 470 miles.
I'm such a rule follower. I don't break rules.
Eagle and Hall came to the same conclusion.
Do I think we would have spread the disease? Realistically, no. But is there that chance? Of course.
A chance they say they couldn't live with.
I'm just trying to focus on the fact that we are in such a better position than so much of the world.
This couple hopes to finish the trail in a few months, but the pandemic's ever-extending timeline is testing their confidence. Sarah Blake Morgan, The Associated Press.
British Prime Minister Boris Johnson has been moved to intensive care after his coronavirus symptoms worsened over the weekend. A spokesperson says he was moved on the advice of his medical team and is receiving excellent care. The 55-year-old Prime Minister was admitted to a hospital in London with persistent symptoms on Sunday evening. Scottish people from all over the country are celebrating National Tartan Day today. The day celebrates pipe bands, Highland dancers, and traditional Scottish sports. Fergus Jones of Bridge City Highland Pipes and Drums spoke about its significance in Lethbridge.
There's 3 pipe bands in Lethbridge, and I know we try to do our best to get together and play as often as we can. Each schedule is different, of course. As for the Scottish Society in Lethbridge, I don't even think there is an actual society. I know there's a lot of Scottish people in Lethbridge.
I know back in the 80s, Alistair Gilchrist was the founding Legion pipe major that had a reputable pipe band in Lethbridge, and he did very well for this area. The tartan symbolizes a family. For example, myself, my mom's side of the family, they're all Johnstons, and so we have a Johnston tartan. Is to recognize what family or what tribe or what clan you're from a distance.
According to a Canadian census, there are more than 660,000 Albertans of Scottish descent. We had lots of clouds and flurries in some parts of southwestern Alberta today. Fortunately, the mercury will be climbing very soon. Full weather details are on deck. It was a mainly overcast day in the city and cool today, wasn't it? Tonight, just a few clouds developing with a low near -1. A warm front moves in tomorrow, increasing our temperature all the way up to 10 degrees. Mainly sunny and 4 is expected on Wednesday. Sunshine and 14 degrees for Thursday. The clouds return on Friday, with the temperature slipping back down to 6 degrees. Saturday, a chance of flurries developing and a high of only -3. Sunday, a mixture of sun and cloud and a high of 2 degrees. Looking at the almanac, the average high for this time of year is 11 degrees and an average low of -3. The highest temperature in the state was recorded in 1977 at 22 degrees, and the record low was -18 in 1975. Sunrise was at 6:57, sunset at 8:10. Let's see how tomorrow's looking across Canada now. Just a few clouds and 13 is expected in Victoria, mainly cloudy, and 11 for Vancouver. A chance of flurries and 2 degrees is on tap for Calgary on Tuesday, mainly sunny and 4 for Edmonton. A mixture of sun and cloud and 6 degrees for Regina tomorrow. Saskatoon had a snowfall warning today. Tomorrow, more flurries developing with a high near +1. Clearing and 7 for Winnipeg. Just a few clouds and 12 for Toronto tomorrow. Sunshine and 12 degrees as well for Ottawa. Sunshine and 10 for Montreal. A chance of showers and 6 for Fredericton. Snow mixed with rain and 5 for Halifax. A chance of flurries and 2 degrees for Charlottetown. And in St. John's, Newfoundland, expect light flurries and a high near 2 degrees for tomorrow. The Conference Board of Canada says our country may lose close to 3 million jobs as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic. Given that many provinces, including Alberta, have ordered the closure of non-essential businesses, the group says our country will likely see its worst ever period of job losses in March and April. And here's a breakdown of some of the industries which are forecasted to be the worst hit. Restaurants and catering companies are expected job losses of over 444,000. Amusement and recreation industries, over 160,000 job losses. Personal care services, over 137,000. Traveler accommodation services, 129,120, and clothing stores, close to 100,970 jobs lost. The group says when you factor in many of those industries, that will account for nearly 15% of total employment. Over the past few weeks, more than 2 million Canadians have filed for insurance claims. The Bank of Canada's latest survey finds the business outlook was soft before the COVID-19 outbreak rocked the Canadian economy. The quarterly survey found businesses in mid-February had a less than rosy picture of their expectations for the rest of the year. There was less optimism in oil-producing regions, where pulling back on capital spending and hiring plans as they watched the price of oil fall. The report out today suggests things were getting worse in more sectors such as restaurants, hotels, and other service industries that are either expected to close or have already closed. Oil prices are down following a meeting between Russia and OPEC aimed at diffusing a price war was pushed back a few days. Analysts are expecting Saudi Arabia and Russia may tone down that war at any time when the world has lots of oil supply and the demand has collapsed since the COVID-19 pandemic. Mexico's President Andrés Manuel Obrador says unlike Canada and the United States, there will be no economic stimulus program coming from his government during the COVID-19 pandemic. Instead, government officials in Mexico will expand social programs and continue to prop up a heavily indebted state-owned oil company. Obrador says his government does not want to take on more debt. His government promised to create 2 million jobs over the next 9 months, a huge undertaking in light of the current coronavirus pandemic. Now, here's a look at today's markets. The markets were up again today. The TSX was up 654 points to 13,592. The Dow was up 1,627 points to 22,679. The S&P 500 was up 175 points on the day to 2663, and the Nasdaq was up 540 points to 7913. Oil was down $2.04 a barrel today to 26.30. Natural gas was down 13 cents to $1.75. Gold was up $5.58 to $1666.55 an ounce. and silver was even on the day at $15.01 an ounce. Wheat is at $244 per metric ton, barley's at $240, canola's at $464, and corn is at $258 per metric ton. Live cattle were down 55 cents to $80.30. Feeder cattle were up $1.20 to $109.30, and lean hogs were up $1.33 to $49.65. The Canadian dollar was even on the day at $70.87 US. Recapping one of our top stories this hour, today is the second anniversary of the Humboldt Broncos bus tragedy. 2 years ago, on a rural highway in Saskatchewan, 16 people were killed and 13 others were injured when a truck collided with a bus carrying the Humboldt Broncos junior hockey team. Last March, the semi-truck driver, Jaspreet Singh Sidhu, who was involved in the Humboldt Broncos bus crash, was sentenced to 8 years in prison. When doing business with China, we have to be reminded that we're dealing with a dictatorship, and because of that, there can be challenges. That's according to the director of Econ Americas, Fergus Hodgson. Watch the interview with Mr. Hodgson and BCN's Paul Arthur discussing the Canada-China relationship. That's coming up shortly.
China is the world's most populous nation and is an economic and military giant, and this country is not known for always playing nice. Our guest today is Fergus Hodgson. He is the director of Econ Americas, a columnist with the Epoch Times, and also a research associate with the Frontier Center for Public Policy. Fergus recently wrote an article entitled, "What Canada Can Do to Oppose Chinese Tyranny." You can actually see that article online at fcpp.org. Fergus, good to have you with us again. Let's begin with the ongoing court case of the U.S. wanting the extradition of Meng Wanzhou, of course a top Huawei executive, and of course China demanding that Canada just let her go. And China has retaliated by, sanctioning Canadian exports, has basically taken a couple of Canadians hostage. I mean, how should we be responding as a country to this? What are our options?
Thank you, Paul. This is such an important issue, and I'm glad to share it, to speak about it with you. And this case is ongoing, so it's been going actually for about 15 months, and it's still not resolved. So the Canadian courts are still working out whether to extradite this lady or to hand her over to the U.S. authorities. And what can Canada do? Basically, this is a lesson. This case is a small part of a broader problem that we're dealing with a totalitarian or dictatorial communist regime that is totally antithetical to Canadian values of liberal values of free speech, civil liberties. And so this requires a long-term reworking or reframing of all engagement with China, that you're not dealing with a friendly nation, you're dealing with a hostile enemy, basically. And they are using Canadian rule of law or Canadian good values to our own detriment, to be frank. We're showing goodwill and they're not repaying it. So while Canada is being extremely careful to have the rule of law, a precise decision, the Chinese, they've been holding 2 men hostage for 15 months, no court case at all. And so they have no moral standing at all. My basic premise is that, one, Canadians need to realize this is a hostile nation, and that if there's a decision to go between the Chinese favorite policies or between U.S. policies, Canada must side with the United States. It just so happens that the United States does have a president who is more aware or has heightened awareness of the China problem, and that is an opportune time for Canada to partner or side more closely with this. There's legislation already passed recognizing, let's say, the sovereignty or the autonomy of Hong Kong, for example. There are many ways Canada can sanction officials. I mean, there's a whole line. The basic problem is identifying that there is a problem, and then there are countless policies that stem from that, particularly with aligning with the United States in a battle of values.
And of course, the difficulty with actually responding that way with China, I mean, their trading power is enormous, that they have such influence on the world and on Canada. So our trade with China, that comes with strings attached, right? And you start talking about human rights abuses, you get a stern response and trade sanctions the other way, which impact our people. I mean, recently, of course, we've seen the Hong Kong protests going on there, all the demonstrations, and, there's some speaking out against that, and they rebuked us fairly sternly on that too, right?
Paul, you're 100% correct, and I, just like you, I'm sure, I'm 100% in favor of free enterprise, right? I want people to be prosperous, to have their businesses grow. Only in extreme cases do I ever let's say, amend that. It just so happens that when you're dealing with a 100% anti-capitalist or crony capitalist nation, and they're trying to undermine your very foundations, you have to think twice about how you handle that. And none of us want to have a Canada being poorer. We shoot ourselves in the foot enough already. So there are many other ways to handle Canadian prosperity without resorting to one of the biggest ideological enemies of the West at this time. And so, I mean, yeah, if we want to discuss how to make Canada more prosperous, that's a different discussion, really, in my view. The fact is that we could remove all the barriers within Canada. We're talking about just trading between the provinces. That's a problem right now. And so there are countless ways, the equalization payment system, all these ways that are basically slowing down or constraining the Canadian economy. Yes, China is a massive nation. It has economic clout. That's a fact. There are many other alternatives to dealing with them. And my sense is, too, that they want Canada to be at the table. So we have to use what clout we have as well in partnership with the United States, which is a great deal of clout.
Right. And sometimes you just have to do the right thing despite the consequences, right? So another thing to consider.
Exactly. There are values that are Canadian, freedom of association, freedom of speech. There are many, gender equality, whatever you want to refer to, and we are dealing with a nation that has so many political prisoners, no one can keep track. It's the leader in the world for political imprisonment. They have organ harvesting, everything you can name. They favor abortion. These even forced abortions. They are so antithetical to Canada that, as you say, this is an ideological battle. This is a battle of values. And we should not forget that. The problem is that the Chinese, they're not foolish, right? They're playing the long game. They've been investing in that ideological battle as well, what they call a battle of soft power. And so they are investing in universities and publications. They are manipulating the way we engage with them and reframing the debate so that we don't think in terms of these liberal values that we should be when we approach the issues.
That's interesting. You mentioned universities. So you're suggesting that they're actually, in one sense, infiltrating our, secondary, post-secondary institutions with, I don't know, are they planting professors or students, that sort of thing, to influence people? How do they go about doing this?
There's so much going on, and I want to recommend a book. Actually, in addition to the Epoch Times, which I write for, there's another think tank, not the Frontier Center, one called the Macdonald-Laurier Institute, and they're doing a lot of work on that. And they've published a great book, Claws of the Panda. I don't know if I can show that one. The Claws of the Panda, and it is about Beijing's campaign of influence and intimidation in Canada. And so it documents in great detail what's going on. In terms of the universities, many ways. Of course, they do explicitly fund Confucius Institutes, which are these on-campus centers which promote the communist or regime-approved version of history and engagement. The Chinese will give scholarships both for their students and for foreign students to go to China, this engagement and all in an approved fashion. The students attending Canadian universities, not just Canadian, but New Zealand, Australian, American universities, many of them will be monitored and actually be spying on each other. It's very sinister. And in my view, it's beyond sinister. It's actually just pathetic, really. These people are bullies, and we should just call them out for that fact, that they're behaving like children, bullies who have no self-control, and they're tyrannical, and we're better than that. We're not going to stoop to their level. We will not allow that to happen in our countries, and we should not allow ourselves to become economically dependent on this nation, because that is what's happened. That so many universities in Canada and the United States now depend on immensely the Chinese tuition payments. So you go to many business schools here in the United States and Canada, the majority of the students will be from China. It's happening on a widespread basis. You can even go to St. Mary's in Halifax. You'll see the business school there is heavily dependent on Chinese students.
That's very interesting. Yeah, thought-provoking for sure. Now, China has also been known to put pressure on Canadian politicians, especially those of Chinese descent. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, short of going to actual outright war, they will use anything, and actually there will be confrontations militarily as well, but they will basically block entry for politicians that go against the regime's wishes. And it is true that, the prominent one in Canada is Richard Lee. He's a British Columbian Liberal Party member, and I think he was it the provincial legislature? I can't remember right now, but he was basically stopped at the on entry into China, held, and then forced back to Canada.
That's
And
because he spoke out against the regime, or?
He's been a long-time critic, yes. And it's so fascinating. I know many Chinese students, and some of them will even try to make the claim that there's no censorship in China, which is just such a laughable joke. That the problem is that in the communist mindset promotes this ends justifies the means thinking. And so they'll say, well, in order to protect our economy, we have to have the one-child policy, or in order to promote stability, we have to control speech, or whatever it may be. And they've reframed the thinking of people to be blind to the violations of their liberties.
Yeah, and again, that is very un-Canadian, frankly. You suggest that China even puts pressure on Canadian media personnel. That's very interesting.
Yes.
How do they go about doing that exactly?
You know, this is, you work in the media, and so it's very sensitive to us. We know how a thriving media is so crucial to a free society. And we also know that, particularly in this time of maybe transition in media away from conventional legacy outlets to new publications, there's a desperation for funding. And this is why there are all these bailouts coming from the federal government in Canada, which is really a disgrace in my mind to media, that we are proud, independent people, and we want to speak our mind. We don't want to be dependent on handouts. And also, I'm such a big believer in alternative media like your own channel that provides what people really want. Anyway, so the Chinese regime has many ways to infiltrate and manipulate the media. They will fund publications, they'll fund PR firms, they'll place op-eds, they'll use their leverage to get certain writers or journalists fired. And this happened, it creates a situation of self-censorship where journalists, they know to toe the party line and just not create problems, lest they be cast aside. And you know this too, that many journalists are not well off. They struggle financially. It's not necessarily a well-compensated profession. And so they do what they need to stay afloat. And so that's why, again, I really favor independent media. And I do not want the Chinese and to be involved in this. But the truth is a broader understanding that media can be manipulated. And particularly in an era where there are fewer and fewer people paying the actual subscriptions and advertisers paying publications or outlets, there's more money being inserted to manipulate the editorial line.
Now, should Canada allow Canadian telecommunications companies, now this is a whole nother ballgame here, isn't it, to use Huawei technology to build the new 5G network? I know recently the U.S. has said it's such a security risk that they'll stop sharing intelligence with Canada. I mean, that's a serious thing.
The fact is, Huawei is a crony capitalist or a communist party front company, and it has arisen because of preferential treatment from the Chinese regime. It is a company, but it is also a tool of the regime. So the fact is, it has to be stopped. They are using it as a vehicle to engage with Canada and other countries around the world. And from memory, the Australians have also rejected Huawei's involvement for that very reason. They realize that communications infrastructure is so crucial to national security and the free society that they do not want an antithetical nation involved. They don't want them to have power over that. And right now, during this coronavirus scenario, we can see exactly the problem, because no one knows what is going on, because the Chinese have kicked out journalists from all sorts of prominent publications, just kicked them out of the country. That's how much they care about free speech. And they will manipulate the line as they see fit. We don't want to give them more power to make that worse beyond their own borders.
Yeah. I can't see that being a good thing, to allow a Chinese company that seems to be, connected to the government of China to be involved in our crucial infrastructure that way. That does have very serious security risks to it. So I'm just encouraging our viewers to actually talk to our government about that. That's a serious thing. You mentioned earlier too, we need to reduce our economic dependence on China. So true. And so by doing so, of course, that will, in the short term, for sure, impact producers here. And that means we need to find some new markets. I know there's been talk about maybe, expanding to Japan or South Korea and so forth. You mentioned as well maybe getting some oil pipelines completed. So hopefully that'll be happening over the next while here. And we look at this whole, COVID-19 pandemic, most likely started in a Chinese wet market, people say, experts say. So, your thoughts on Canada and maybe the world, pressuring China to stop allowing this from happening again. How can we, maybe as the West, I guess, put some sort of pressure on China to change their direction here?
That's a really great question. And of course, I would love to see China change direction, right? This issue of this wet market and the coronavirus, or the CCP virus, whatever you want to call it, it's a symptom of a much deeper problem. First, I have zero confidence that the Chinese will respect any kind of agreement to stop these wet markets or to change in a way that would make this not happen again. The real long-term pressure would have to be with going with many of the friendly nations. So whether it's South Korea or Japan or Singapore, whatever it may be, other nations that are much more pro laissez-faire capitalism or the West. And alone, those nations are not as large or as influential as China, but together they are. And so we just have to make a long-term, geostrategic priority of going with nations that side with us and not falling to the trap of an early carrot for a long-term stick. And so, yes, in the long run, my own view is that really this regime has to undergo fundamental reforms. Whether Canada has the clout to make that happen or not, that's doubtful. What we can do is preserve Canada herself and not fall prey to this predatory regime.
Yeah, no, that's a great point. I'm running out of time here, but Fergus, you make a good point that we can't do it alone, but together with allies like the U.S. or the UK. You mentioned Australia. Banding together, we need not to, I guess, cower in fear and say we can't do anything. We can do something, and we need to tell our government to do so. All right, thank you so much, Fergus. I much appreciate your time here today.
Thank you, Paul. It's my privilege. Okay.
You bet. Fergus Hodgson is the Director of Econ Americas.
Many Canadians are nervous about their health, the economy, and their personal finances due to the COVID-19 pandemic. What kind of an impact will this have on nonprofit groups as well? Today's guest is Kim Savage, the Executive Director of Hope International Development Agency. Kim joins me now from New Westminster, BC. Welcome to BCN, Kim.
Thank you, Hal. Glad to be on the show.
Now, first of all, explain what Hope International Development Agency is really all about.
Absolutely. So we're an international development agency. We're in 16 countries around the world, and we come alongside working with people who are facing the most extreme versions of poverty. So we're talking about people that don't have access to clean water, no access to food, no opportunities to generate incomes. And we work with partners around the world to really come alongside those people, extend tangible compassion, and help install clean water systems. We help with income generating opportunities, and we offer a variety of programming around food security initiatives.
Yeah, let's talk a bit about some of those outreach programs and how they really impact the most needy.
Absolutely. So, for example, I was just in Ethiopia about a month ago, just before all of this COVID stuff happened. And I was able to be firsthand with the people our beneficiaries are, and to be in the villages and to see what happens when you put clean water in a village, to see what happens when groups of women gather and start small businesses, and to see that have the ripple effect of kids being able to go to school and enough food, to see families taking up agriculture programming and doing little micro farms and that sort of thing. It's pretty inspiring and pretty transformational. So it's really great.
So what kind of impact, Kim, has the COVID-19 pandemic really had on Hope International and on other nonprofit groups around the world?
Absolutely. So, just like we are feeling in our own personal finances, in our own households, the effects of COVID-19 to varying degrees, in the charitable sector, for many of us, we would have had some kind of fundraising event this spring. And for Hope International specifically, we were to have 6 different fundraising dinners that were going to raise about $1.5 million of funding that would have gone overseas for all of this kind of programming and initiatives. And all of that, of course, has been wiped out. So, it puts us in a very challenging situation. Nonprofits, by their nature, only have a limited runway, 3 to 6 months at the most in terms of weathering these kind of storms. And it's kind of a double whammy. It's not just not having the event or the events, it's also how people are feeling about their own personal economics and all of that sort of thing. And it's got a pretty big effect. I can't sugarcoat that.
Yeah, absolutely. It impacts your donors as well. If their hours have been cut back or maybe they lost their jobs, how much are they able to donate each and every month, right?
Absolutely. So, certainly for us, we have seen a drastic decline in contributions so far. We are doing things, working with our donors to try and, get as much support as we can to support our programming overseas. But we get how vulnerable Canadians are feeling right now. And so we're trying to be as sensitive as we can to that.
How about emergency government funding during this pandemic? Would that help at all?
Yeah, so certainly the federal government and even the provincial governments to a certain extent have been doing various initiatives to help with some of that support. And we're looking through mechanisms like through Global Affairs Canada and that sort of thing, again, to try and get support to already extremely vulnerable communities, get support to them. Because as vulnerable as we are, imagine not having water to be able to wash your hands, or not enough food to keep you healthy, or medical supplies and all of that sort of thing. So there's a lot to unpack in that.
You're right. Here we're told to wash our hands, to limit the effects of COVID-19, but at least, like you said, we have that clean water. Now, once the pandemic is over, are you planning on holding those fundraising dinners as soon as possible?
Yeah, I think it's going to look different how we do things. I think COVID-19 is going to change how people feel about being in gatherings for the next little while. So we're looking to provide some unique opportunities for people. One of the things we thought about was actually part of our fundraising event is a film screening. So we were thinking about maybe doing some drive-ins this later this summer or into the fall. That would be just kind of unique and fun, but not have everybody super close together. And we're certainly going to be reaching out to our donors as much as we can in the weeks and months to come.
Kim, let me ask you something. Let's say I'm a donor to Hope International Development Agency, right? I've been donating for, let's say, the last, few years or so. Now, my hours have been cut back severely in my job. I go from full-time to part-time. Explain how that conversation would go between yourself and myself when you call me.
The first thing we're doing is actually just to check in with how you're doing. And if you were to say to me, oh, I've lost my job, all I would say is thank you for your support, and whatever you can do, keep doing it. And if you need to take a pause, you do that. If it was somebody that's doing still okay, we'd say, I hope that you can continue to keep going on your support, keep caring about those people overseas, and really just trying to have a very sensitive conversation around that, because we get how people are feeling, and we want to be really sensitive to that.
And you could be very much a sounding board for people who are going through a tough time themselves right now, correct?
Absolutely. Yeah.
Now, does it really frustrate you to see governments around the world spend billions or even trillions to help alleviate the economic impact on citizens, and then compare that to how little in comparison the same governments provide to help those facing such greater difficulties in the nations where you serve?
Yeah, I would have to say that for the most part, the developed world, most Western nations are pretty generous to developing countries. And so I would never want to point fingers and pit people against people. And we're actually more having the conversation, encouraging governments to continue their support of developing nations, not withdraw and become insulated. So I don't think it's an either or. I think it's a both and at this juncture.
Now, Kim, share a couple of stories here with our viewers of real people whose lives have been changed through your ministry.
Sure. So I was just like I said earlier, I was just in Ethiopia, and I met this woman, Anisha, and she was a widow. She had 4 children. Her husband had passed away, and she was in this little village in Ethiopia. And a couple of years before that, we had installed a clean water system there. And she was part of a program called Self-Help Groups, where they do microloans for small business opportunities and that sort of thing. And she got to share the story of how she was able to provide income for all of her kids to go to school. she had provided income to have her 2 eldest sons take this driver training program so that they could be delivery truck drivers for various goods going between the villages. And she had just recently purchased a new home. And, home is relative in this conversation. But for her, she had purchased a new home and she was self-reliant and self-sustaining and so proud of where she had come. And it was just so exciting to see that spark in her eyes. So that was really incredible. It was really, really incredible.
Do you see a lot of the needs when it comes to food, shelter, and water in a lot of the underdeveloped countries in Africa? Or how about some maybe other continents around the world?
I haven't made it to Cambodia yet, but Cambodia and the Philippines are 2 other countries that we're in. And, the people change, but the circumstances are relatively the same. And so, they're facing the same needs. They're in very remote villages that are not easily supported or accessed by the more major centers. So there's just, like I said, there's always so much need out there, and it's really inspiring. And it spurs us on to keep doing the work when you see those stories of transformation take place.
Kim, how is COVID-19 really affecting the lives of the most needy in our world? I mean, they typically don't have the same access to medical coverage and care that we do.
Yeah. So I would say there is a triple threat on how COVID-19 is going to affect people in developing countries. So as you already alluded to, they don't have the same access to medical care. There aren't, government. There aren't the same level or extent of government-run hospitals. I mean, even when I was in Ethiopia, I saw quote-unquote hospitals that had no supplies and no staff. So basically, they were buildings, empty buildings. So medical supplies, medical care is a huge issue. The hygiene and sanitation that goes along with the spread of disease, right, especially in COVID-19, that is going to be a huge issue. Just proximity of people. Villages are quite tight-knit, and even that social distancing piece that's important to slow down the spread of the disease is an issue. And then, of course, there's all the financial burdens and all of that sort of thing about not being able to get enough food. And that unknown, like we have these huge public health systems that we have medical health officers saying, do this, do that, dispersing information. That's not happening at a very small village level, and it's a little harder, or a lot harder, I should say.
Is life even more challenging for some of the women in the countries you serve in? And if so, do you have any programs specifically directed towards helping those women?
Yeah, so certainly the plight and the struggle of women in developing countries is very difficult. It's very challenging. Just water collection alone can often take 4 and 5 hours a day for women and children in a family. And many of our programs, almost all of them, focus and orbit around women and children, supporting women to help generate incomes, supporting them with their husbands and families to do food security initiatives, whether it's micro farms or livestock training or livestock agriculture, that sort of stuff. So really working with the family holistically, but with an emphasis on women and children.
I was going to say, how about some programs specifically designed for the kids as well?
Yeah, so we have a whole self-reliance model. So we probably do a little bit less with children than other organizations. Some organizations have a big emphasis on education, and we do that in some of our countries. Some of the programming we have in a couple of our countries, but that's not as widespread. Like I said earlier, our main buckets are really clean water, food security, and income generation, because when people's incomes lift and they have their basic needs met, they have more resources to, send kids to school and that sort of thing.
So big picture, maybe of the next 5 to 10 years, Kim, where do you see Hope International Development Agency growing to which point?
Yeah, so I've been speaking with my team and with our partners that I would love to see our organization be able to double its impact in 20 years or in 10 years. So, right now we serve about 500,000 people a year on a budget of, around 15-20 million. I'd like to see that budget double, and I'd like to see the number of people reach double. So I'm really excited to see where we're going to go in the future.
How are you sharing the hope and faith in the Lord during these trying times of COVID-19 and some of these impoverished nations?
Yeah, so we often get asked the question, what compels you to go? What compels you to be here and do the work? And it's always a great conversation starter to talk about how Christ's love compels us. So that's really kind of the ethos and focus of what we do.
That's awesome. Kim Savage, the Executive Director of Hope International Development Agency, thanks a lot for joining me from New Westminster, BC.
Thanks, Hal.
On behalf of all of us here at BCN, I'm Hal Roberts. God bless, and thanks so much for watching.